Welcome to East Gippsland Shire Council's meeting today of the 21st of March 2023. And for the record, today is Harmony Day, where we acknowledge the cultural diversity of our communities, and it is also the equinox for those who are interested in those bigger stellar events. East Gippsland Shire Council live streams, records and publishes its meetings via webcasting. These recordings are available for viewing by the public. During the meeting, any members of the public who are addressing the Council will have their image and comments recorded. No other person has the right to record Council meetings unless approval has been granted by the Chair, and that is me tonight. In line with the Local Government Act 2020, councillors are able to attend Council meetings electronically or in person, and the meeting will be open to the public via live streaming. Members of the public are invited to view the live-streamed Council meeting by following the link on the Council's website or Facebook page. If Council encounters technical difficulties tonight with the live streaming during the meeting, we may adjourn until the issue is resolved. If technical issues can't be resolved, the meeting may be postponed to a later time or date. Councillors, we at East Gippsland Shire Council acknowledge the Gunai, Kurnai, Monero and Biannual people as the traditional custodians of the land and waters that encompass East Gippsland Shire and their enduring relationship with country. The traditional custodians have cared and nurtured East Gippsland for tens of thousands of years. Council values their living culture and practices and their right to self-determination. Council pays respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people living in East Gippsland, their elders, past, present and future. Councillors, a member's attendance can only be recorded as present at a council meeting when the member can confirm they meet all of these criteria, and this is for our councillors who are attending remotely. That they can hear proceedings, they can see other members in attendance and can be seen by other members, and they can be heard to speak. So I'll now confirm with each of our councillors online in turn that they can see, hear and be heard by each other, and to note assurance from each that the location they're participating from is secure to ensure confidential deliberations remain confidential. Councillor Yuri, can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can, Mayor.
And we can see and hear you. Can you confirm that the location you are participating from is secure to ensure confidential items are dealt with in a confidential manner?
Yes, I can confirm that. Thank you.
Councillor Yuri, thank you. Good evening, Councillor White. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can.
Councillor White, can you confirm the location you're participating from is secure to ensure confidential items are dealt with in a confidential manner?
I can.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Buckley, good evening. Can you see and hear us?
Good evening, Mayor. Yes, I can.
Can you confirm the location you are participating from, from is secure to ensure confidential items are dealt with in a confidential manner?
Indeed it is.
Thank you very much, councillors. Item 1.2, councillors, is apologies, and I don't think we have any apologies tonight.
Correct, Mayor.
Are there any declarations of conflict of interest, councillors or officers? None are noted. Councillors, can we confirm that the minutes of the council meeting held on 28 February be confirmed, please? Councillor Allen. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Yuri. Councillor Allen, did you want to speak to the matter? Councillor Yuri.
No,
is the
thank you.
motion opposed, councillors? Would anybody else like to speak to or against the motion? In which case I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, CEO. The minutes are confirmed. Item 1.5, councillors, is the next meeting, which will be held, is scheduled to be held here on Tuesday, the 11th of April, 273 Main Street, Bairnsdale, commencing at 6 p.m. Councillors, I don't believe we have any requests for leave of absence, CEO.
No, we don't, Mayor.
Thank you, councillors. We're moving on to item 1.7, and before we do that, councillors, I'd like to acknowledge that we have two special guests with us tonight. So Ms Catherine Larkins and Ms Frances Harrison, whom I should mention are both recipients of the Medal of the Order of Australia. They've come here tonight to make a presentation on the Warrenbina Arts Project and present the Black Post White Book to Council. Councillors, I would like to suspend standing orders and now move the following motion: that standing orders be suspended to allow time for a presentation to Council of the Warranbina Arts Project. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Uri, thank you. Thank you. Councillors, the standing orders are now suspended. It is currently 6:05 p.m. and I'd like to welcome Catherine and Francis to please come in to join us at the lectern. And for the record, the live streaming continues, but our standing orders are suspended. So we can take as long as it takes to hear about this project. And welcome. It's so wonderful to see you.
Thank you. I thought we'd just briefly introduce ourselves first.
Please do.
We don't know us that well, so I'll let Francis.
Francis Harrison, Lake Central.
Catherine and Francis, I'll just check online that you can be heard, because can you, I just mark, yeah, that's better. If you can just stand up a bit closer and we'll know that you are getting your voices loud and clear on the live stream.
Oh, there you
Yeah.
go. Francis Harrison, worked with Catherine for about 20 years. That's how we started Gunya and Warranbina, and I've just been the artist for Kangaroo Tales and Warranbina. Yeah.
I'm a local from generations, probably 4 generations in East Gippsland, and I've worked in the arts all my life and taught at the TAFE College before the art school was closed for 28 years. So my involvement in education was paramount, but also my dedication to social change through the arts always underpinned everything I did. And as a part-time lecturer, I spent a lot of time thinking up really wild and wonderful things to do with communities. And Mallacoota was one of those homes where a lot of my energies and the art school energies went. And over the years, I became really interested in cross-cultural collaboration, and growing up at Lake Tyers Beach and getting to know a lot of the Aboriginal community through the early 50s and 60s, I built bonds with families and met a lot of people along the way. And over time, projects developed that really were suited to that idea of bringing the two cultures together so that we could make exciting work that was contemporary, but it had what we would call a cultural overlay of depth and storytelling that was really embracing all of us, you know. And so we did things like the spirit poles that you would know about at the front door of the Lakes Entrance Health Centre, which was the first permanent artwork, Aboriginal storytelling piece that actually was built to encourage people to come into the health centre as a place for healing from the Aboriginal community. And at around that time, LEHA was established, the Lakes Entrance Aboriginal Health Services, and Francis's grandparents had a lot to do with the establishment of the original health service, and then her father and mother and aunts have all been involved in that. So there's a deep connection into the Lakes Entrance community through many avenues. And when we first started working together, we didn't have a company. I needed to get money and have it auspiced for projects. So I went to Bruce Hurley, who was the CEO of the health centre in Lakes. Someone said there's a guy there that would be happy to help. And I knocked on his door and I said, Bruce, I want to do a project that's about 100 grand's worth of grants, and I need someone to auspice it. And he said, no worries. And that was when I met Francis and we did Common Ground, which was on Australia Day in 2007 in Lakes Entrance. And the first Welcome to Country in Lakes Entrance occurred at that event, and we celebrated 60,000 years of history on that day and did an event that was, you know, to this day considered a really remarkable accomplishment on the foreshore. 5,000 people came and A lot of them were Aboriginal
Yeah.
people. It was incredible to get that sort of sense of unity on a day that is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
So after that, we continued to do more work at the health centre and other projects, and we decided to go for a big commission from the state government in 2011, which was called the Indigenous Cultural Expressions Commission. And Lenny Hayes, Francis
Yeah.
and I came up with an idea to do a Spiegel tent, as most of you would know about the Spiegel tent in Melbourne that sits outside the Arts Centre. It's touring around the world, but we wanted to do one that was for Aboriginal people that could tour in Gippsland. So we put this design together, and it was a $200,000 commission, a one-off to celebrate 175 years of Victoria, and it was for all Aboriginal people in the state, and all the biggest of the organisations, you know, the Melbourne Museum and, you know, Koori Heritage Trust, they all went for it, and we got it. And we could not believe that we had, you know, like we almost, it was just, it didn't even go to the second short listing. The people in the committee in Melbourne that, the panel that looked at it was so blown away by the idea. They just thought it was a great idea. And so we worked with an architect to put the idea together in the beginning, and then he drew up the plans. We had everything ready to go. And for 10 years, we tried to get the rest of the money to do it, and we never got it. But over those 10 years, we built things to go with it. So we thought, when we finally get this, because we always believed it was going to happen, we formed a company. We had pro bono support from Arnold Block Liebler in Collins Street.
Yeah.
Lenny Francis and I
Yeah.
went to their rooms in the penthouse of Collins Street. And they set up the company pro bono. Warren Beaner was created, and we had the support of the state government to do that. We set up our headquarters in Lakes Entrance at Myer Street, 14 Myer Street. We had it branded. We did everything to the highest levels of governance. We had a board that was 75% Aboriginal people with representation from the non-Indigenous community in order to be able to address the needs of the governance. And over the 10 years, we accomplished a lot of great things, but we never accomplished realising the vision that we set it all up for, not through lack of trying. So some of the things that we did to go with Gunya when it finally was going to tour were films, and the elders in Lakes Entrance were keen for people out there as this inflatable art space toured to know about where it came from. And my sort of knowledge of growing up in the area and knowing how much the struggle was there for people in Lake Tyers and around that, you know, as a little girl visiting the bush camps, I knew how tough it was, and, you know, I was devastated by what I saw, and so I thought, well, this generation of people still are alive and they could tell their stories. So I hunted high and low to find money to do these films called Black Post White. And Lenny and Francis went and found elders who were willing to talk, and we got a filmmaker, and we did it in my home downstairs in a room in the house. And we drove around and picked people up, and we needed to pay them to tell their stories. And the people in Melbourne said, you don't pay for documentary film. We don't, you know, it's unprecedented. We're not, this was Culture Victoria. And I went to the Shire and wrote a grant, and the Shire were the ones that came to the party. Yeah. So the Shire paid, and they paid for these elders a fee to tell their story, and we paid them with the paper trail, but in cash, basically, at the door as they arrived with a cup of tea. The filmmaker was set up in the downstairs of the house, and each elder would go in and sit with just the filmmaker, no one else in the room, and tell their story. Some of them were in there for hours, like
Yeah.
an hour to 2 hours. Francis's father, people who had never spoken about any of these things before spoke. Vincent Lamberti then went on to edit those films, and we created the Black Post White series that were put online and are still online in Melbourne. And they were used by all sorts of organisations, the AMBOs, lots of people got copies, and they were incredibly informative. It was the first time this kind of information had been shared. We then went on over time to do another series called The Oral Histories of Lake Tyers and Surrounds, and we did another probably 8 or 10 elders. And we also, whenever we did little projects like the corroboree on the water at Lake Tyers, I would try and sort of squeeze a bit of money out of the budget to try and get 2 more interviews done. So over time, we ended up with 20 elders that were interviewed. And we had a board member come in towards the end of the company's life who was a writer, and he said, Catherine, James Mulcahy, he was a principal at one of the schools in Bensdale prior to that, he said, where are those original interviews? Do they still exist? And I said, yeah, the filmmakers got them. And he said, well, I'm happy to sit there and transcribe them all. And he transcribed all of the stories from all of the films that had been made, and then we proceeded to try and put that into a book. So that's what this book is. And that process in itself became extraordinarily complex because we needed to get permission for the stories to be put in the book.
Yeah.
So we went to Terry Janke, who are a law firm in New South Wales that are all Aboriginal lawyers, and they are at the cutting edge of intellectual cultural property rights, and they advised us for a fine sum of money, but we managed at that time to get some COVID money that was from working for Victoria, or Andrew Jacomos was very generous. And we managed to get it all the deeds done, everything signed up. And then we sourced photographs from the State Library that were done years prior to the films of elders that were in the stories by Angela Lynn Kushka, who's a renowned Australian documentary photographer. And we also took some of the portraits in the book from the film grabs and had to have them restored up to a bigger format so they could be put in there. We worked with a company in Melbourne during COVID when it was impossible to go and sort of do first-hand dealing, so things were being posted back and forth. The whole book was printed by the Melbourne Print Company. All the paper is recycled. All the design was done by Francis and I for the layout, and every single detail of that book has been, you know, sort of worked over to be the most beautiful production we could do. And the company in Melbourne that printed it, who have been in operation for probably 30 or 40 years, said it's one of the proudest moments of their time. So it's an incredibly beautiful book. We only did 250 copies because that's all we could afford. It was expensive to make it as beautiful as it is. But we wanted to honour the people whose stories are in that book, and probably half have passed on since their stories were gathered. And at the end of each story, you'll note there's a little side sort of caption that cites where the interviews were done, why they were done, how they were done, what the project was that they were housed in, because they've all come out of the arts. It's not just a book that's like sits in the world of literature, it actually sits in the world of visual arts. So it's part of our story as a company. But we have 9 copies. Mendy suggested that I'd love them to be available as much as possible across the East Gippsland Shire, so would all the elders and the community. We had a launch in Bensdale during COVID at the, and you all, Yeah, you all went off. You were on a bus trip, I think, to South Gippsland or something. There was it clashed on the day. It was really unfortunate. And we had to limit the numbers in there, but we distributed the books to all the families. Every family got 4 or 5 copies. So many of the elders in the stories came for the first time to the cinema. They'd never been to the cinema, most of them. And we had a really lovely sort of, screened all the films and handed out the books. So we're in the process now of putting books into the State Library, National Library. I think Francis has got them out to most of the schools, and the Koori Heritage Trust. And we've folded the company. It's gone into voluntary receivership with still a very good budget sitting there. So everything has been handled to the absolute highest level of excellence as a company. And we're handing over the assets to the Lakes Entrance Aboriginal Health Service, all the tables and furniture and things. And we are hoping, we're currently working to house all our films and stories in the Koori Heritage Trust in Melbourne. So that's sort of it in the short version. But if anyone's got any questions, yeah.
Catherine, what an amazing story. Congratulations, Arthur.
The kangaroo skins,
Well,
they're beautiful. Where are they going?
they're being reinvented at the moment.
Yeah.
Francis is doing a new series into the same, sort of, because they were made to go, for those people who don't know, most people know about them, but they were going to tour with Gunya. They were made to go with the art space. So they were made, the films were made, there was all this work that we got separate funding for and managed to complete, and road cases were made for them to travel and fit into the shipping containers, and the whole thing was sort of custom designed. Maybe one day someone will see it and go, let's fund that, But anyway, they are still in their containers, and we're hoping the Koori Heritage Trust is going to put them into their care. And Frances is redoing the work as paintings, so she's and burning. Yeah. So it's a whole new series. They'll probably have their their first showing in Melbourne and the Koori Heritage Trust has just expanded. It's at Federation Square, as most of you would know, and they've just been given double the footprint. So it's not going to go away soon. It's getting bigger and more important. And of course, the Butte Ute that I did in 2002 is in Bunjalaka with the Lakes Entrance community. So it's in their permanent collection as well. So we've got a presence down there now that's, it's part of the story. It's sad that we had to end. It's heartbreaking, but arts are a bit like that. They go in circles, and closing the art school was the end of a chapter. Things sort of have to be reborn, but it's very hard to keep arts companies running. It's very hard to write funding all the time and get the money. And something as good as Gunya didn't get up, and that's, evidence in its own right of how difficult it is. We had Brandis at the top of the arts at that time, and he just, gutted the Australia Council basically, and that's where we wanted to get the money. So, yeah, but we have to look at the positives. So it's all about what we have accomplished, how good that is, and look, the films are incredible. I think the Shire, if they have any way of making those films accessible to schools, there's an online version of the book with a separate ISBN number that could be made available to the schools. We would love help.
I'll talk to the CEO about that, Catherine, and whether through the library or... Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I think we need a photograph. Mendy, you have a question?
No, not really, but just to say how sorry I am not to be there in the chamber with you, Catherine and Francis, but thank you so much for coming in. Congratulations for all that amazing work. and for the legacy that you both leave through this work. Those books are just extraordinarily beautiful, and the fact that you're making them available for people is just wonderful. So thank you for coming in and sharing your story.
Thanks, Mandy. Thanks, everyone.
Now, councillors, I've been reminded by the manager governance through various eyebrow wigglings that I forgot to get a vote on suspending standing orders. So technically we may have been remiss there, but I'm going to get this right as we move to resume standing orders. So thank you. Do I have a seconder then? Councillor Crook, would you like to speak to the motion? No. Anybody else like to speak to the motion or for and against the motion to resume standing orders? This time I will put it to the vote then. All those in favour of resuming standing orders? Thank you, councillors. And it is 6:28 and standing orders have been resumed. Thank you, councillors, for that. That was really quite extraordinary. So we're in item 1.7, open forum, and 1.7.1, which is petitions. And we have a petition there about rezoning properties. Mr Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. Councillors, before you is a report regarding a petition titled Rezoning of Properties, which states, we ask the rezoning of properties from farming zone to rural living zone to accurately reflect its size and use. The petition has been lodged by a Therese Bartlett, councillors. In terms of the report itself, councillors, the petition has been received and presented in accordance with the Governance Rule 8.7, and to note the petition has been referred to the Manager Planning for inclusion in the submissions for the Rural Land Use Scheme community feedback process. And also to note, councillors, that if the officer recommendation is approved, that council officers will write to the head petitioner advising them of these actions. Tonight also with me is Al Bowling, Manager Governance, who can answer any of the technical questions if you have any. Thank you, Mayor.
Mr Canizzaro, thank you. Councillors, any questions? Thank you, councillors, in which case there is a recommendation. Do we have a motion? Sorry, Kirsten, did you have a question? No. Sonia, sorry, Sonia, go ahead. I was looking for the yellow hand on the screen.
Yeah, sorry, it went up and went down because you moved on.
Yeah, go ahead, Sonia. Councillor Buckley.
So my question is that this is tabled. It'll be put into the as a submission into the rural land use strategy to be then considered by council. I just wanted to get confirmation on that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Buckley, and through you, Mayor. That's correct.
Mm-hmm. And is this specific to one particular area or such as Lindenow, I think, or is it across the whole of the Shire?
Thank you, Councillor Buckley, and through you, Mayor, again. The petition is asking for rezoning of properties from farming zone to rural living zone to accurately reflect its size and use, and that's the detail we have on the petition, Councillor.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr Canizzaro.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Any further questions, councillors? Okay, thank you. Then we do have a recommendation. Is there a motion? Councillor Buckley, Councillor Crook seconded. Councillor Buckley, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just to say that it's very important to have community consultation on the rural land use strategy and to be listening to communities' concerns. Very important that people are able to purchase their properties in good faith and be able to use them in the best way they possibly see fit. So I support this petition.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Councillor Crook? Is the motion opposed, councillors? Would anybody else like to speak to or against the motion? In which case, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. Carried unanimously. CEO, we're on to items 1.7.2.
There are no questions of council.
Thank you.
Tonight.
Public submissions.
There is one person wishing to speak, Mayor.
And we will do that at the item, or do you want to do that here?
We would normally do it at the item.
Okay.
Was that the plan?
We do have
Alba?
Mr Lever waiting. We could ask Mr Lever to speak, and that would save Mr Lever having to wait in the wings.
Sure.
I'm happy to take that executive decision, councillors, if you are, and ask Mr Lever to join the meeting and speak to us. Are you happy with that, Manager Governance? Not going to upset the apple cart?
I do feel that as a councillor, that we should be allowed to express our concerns for our voicing their questions towards us. And
That's it.
Sorry, we were just hearing you again, Councillor Buckley. I don't know where that came from, but so we're asking Mr Lever. Good evening, Mr Lever. We've moved you up the agenda so you didn't have to wait until the item, so that if you are happy to speak now, are you comfortable with doing that? And your microphone is off, which is the catch cry of the 2020s. And now it's on. There, we've got you now and we can see you. Good evening and welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors, for allowing me to again speak to this petition. I think the petition is clearly put forward in the agenda what our concerns are. Since the last submission, I've spoken to all the residents that are on that petition. All the people that are listed are properties that directly face the Koala Park on the western side of 10th Avenue, and they would have a public toilet in view that might be built there. And two of us abut the park at the fire station end and would be more directly affected. The main concern, and what's not put in the petition, is the positioning of the toilet. And I understand that there is opportunities to change it from where it was originally proposed. When we view the site, there's an area of opportunity at the intersection of the Koala Trail and the nature trail that radiates in an easterly direction from the Koala Trail. That intersection is, I guess, to the south of the car park, and it would be on the east side of 12th Avenue. And everywhere from that little area back into the bush would be a satisfactory. I think it would satisfy all the people that signed the petition if that position were considered. Now, I know there's a problem with getting from there to the interceptor pit, but as an engineer of many years' experience, I've been involved in the design of systems like this, and we've successfully put pumping systems in that can do the job. And it can be imagined that a solar-powered pumping system would be able to drive the sewage from the extended pipework to the intercepted pit. When we looked at that position, incidentally, if you take a straight line to the interceptor pit, you could dig a trench for the pipeline without affecting any trees in the reserve. It would be a more acceptable solution than perhaps going elsewhere. But we asked the opportunity just to, if the proposal must go ahead, to be involved in the discussion about the position of the toilet block.
Mr Lever, thanks so much. Yes, I'll go ahead.
The other point that was raised, that everybody would be satisfactory if eco-loos were used, and there are places on the island where these have been in use for many years, on the gravelly Point Road extension, which runs along the eastern face of the island. And I don't believe there's been any problems with those, so there's perhaps a solution there if plumbing can't be arranged to pump to the interceptor pit.
Mr Lever, thanks so much. That item, councillors, is item 5.2.1, and we'll be receiving that a bit later in the meeting. But we appreciate the input that you've been able to provide us, Mr Lever, and gives us pause for thought. And I know that many councillors have been over to the island and paced out the sites, so we have a good visual understanding of what you're proposing.
Okay, thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, councillors. Let's farewell Mr Lever, and we'll continue with the meeting. But Mr Lever, you're welcome to continue watching on our YouTube channel, should you so desire.
Okay, thank you.
If there's nothing on Netflix, stay watching.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, councillors. That was item 1.7, and we are now on to item 1.8. CEO, we have an item to be tabled.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We do. Quite a special item, actually, which has been included in the agenda. So residents of East Gippsland have received a thank you letter from His Majesty King Charles III for the book of condolence, the condolence book message that was sent on the death of Queen Elizabeth II. So I know that the letter is actually included in the agenda, but there is also a card that has been part of that process as well. So it's quite a special thing that's actually come, and we'll look to do something appropriate with that as well in terms of having that on display. But I present that to you and table it for tonight.
Well, thank you, CEO, and on behalf of the councillors and the community of East Gippsland, we accept that very important letter from Buckingham Palace and a nice card from King Charles. So we'll find the right place to put that on display, yep, in perpetuity.
Yep.
And that was following the death of Queen Elizabeth II. So that's rather special, councillors. Have you all had a look at it and seen it? Okay, I'll pass it around so you can see.
Thank you, Mayor.
Terrific. Notices of motion, I don't believe there are any, or deferred business, in which case we can move on to councillors and delegates' reports. If we're happy to do that, councillors. Councillor Greeson, do you have a report you'd like to share?
Thank you, Mayor. I didn't attend any meetings of organisations that I represent the council on during the last 3 weeks, but I did attend a few other events which I found very interesting. So on the 8th of March, I attended the MAV workshop on, quote, sorting out the problem of contaminated curbside recycling, what actually works. And it was actually very interesting. They'd done some research with 6 councils about what is required to change people's behaviour. And simple education doesn't change people's behaviour, and nor does smiley stickers on bins. But there are things that can. So I thought that was very interesting. I attended the Youth Ambassadors meeting on the 8th of March in the Bairnsdale Library with the Mayor, and that was lovely. And all the office bearers were appointed, and the new chair of the Youth Ambassadors was appointed, 15-year-old Banjo, who's got a huge amount of energy and light and life, and he's really going to make his mark as time goes by. The Greater Gippsland Offshore Wind Project is something that we should all be watching closely, because it's going to generate, it's a massive project, it's going to generate a lot of work and employ a lot of companies through the various stages of its building and 30 years of running. But essentially it's going to be, it'll generate enough power to for 1 million domestic homes. It's going to be between 10 and 43 kilometres from the Gippsland coast, between Woodside Beach and Sea Spray. It'll be Australia's first offshore wind zone, and within the area there'll be 139 bottom-fixed turbines, 2 to 4 offshore substations and associated infrastructure in Commonwealth waters, and a new terminal station at Gifford area. It's huge, and these turbines are going to be up to 325 metres tall. They're just huge. So there's a lot of opportunity there, and their aim is to try and minimise the gap between the coal stations closing and energy coming from wind. On the 15th of March, I attended a part of a 2-day discussion about regenerative tourism in Lakes Entrance, which was attended by people who've been involved in different aspects of the tourism industry as a part of social enterprise. There was some really interesting discussion from a lot of different perspectives, and I won't go into it. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more come out of that. But the highlight for me was attending the launch of Federation University's National Centre for Reconciliation, Truth and Justice. The event was held in Ballarat and live streamed to Morwell to the Fed Uni's Innovation Centre there. And they've actually established an Associate Deputy Vice-Chancellor Reconciliation position, and Professor Andrew Gunston holds that position, and he has a team that will be leading the development of their RAP at the transform level, which is the top level, across Australia, across all of their sites. So he chaired a panel discussion with Senator Pat Dodson and Dr Jackie Huggins AM, and these two elders talked about their belief in the importance of the voice. They talked about the fact that it's integral to reconciliation. They talked about reconciliation being meaning recognition, justice and healing, being able to look one another in the eye directly and work together. Senator Dodson talked about reconciliation living inside your heart and it being two spirits coming together, not to absorb or to suppress, but the richness of both in celebration and joy. They talked about how hard it's been under governments that don't want to know them or hear them, and how amazing it'll be for the next generation of people to have a foot in both camps and be able to combat racism, which is still endemic. Senator Dodson was very clear about this being a principle for Aboriginal people to be recognised, and that the yes votes about the liberation brings to all of us. It's the principle and getting it done. It's the legacy for our children. And he said the voice enshrined in the Constitution does not change the Constitution at all. It adds a small chapter at the very end. Chapter 9, he called it, so it's Chapter 9. On the 16th of March, I went to the annual Closing the Gap Day at Bairnsdale Regional Health Services, which is always a delightful day with huge, enormous, colourful cakes and sausage sizzle and some lovely speeches. So Ash Munro, the lead coordinator of the Aboriginal Health Unit there, made an excellent heartfelt speech, which was great. And then last Friday, the Victorian Local Government Grants Commission came to talk to us and taught us heaps about how they fund all the councils in Victoria. And and just saying, in 2022-23, Victorian councils received a total of $680.4 million from the Commonwealth Government in financial assistance grants. 178.5 million for local roads and the rest in general purpose grants. East Gippsland Shire Council receives $17,991,539, which is about 16.2% of our recurrent revenue. So those were my meetings.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Greeson. Councillor Uri, I'm just going to move across what is my room and invite you.
Thank you, Mayor. I went to several events which celebrated International Women's Day, but firstly I'd like to highlight a program which East Gippsland Shire Council is highlighting. It's an opportunity for women called Women Leading Locally. It's a fellowship program being offered by the Institute of Company Directors. So it's a well-credentialed program. There are 65 full fee-paying places being offered, and 32 of those will go to local government areas like East Gippsland. They'll be prioritised in the selection process. So the program, which is, I can't tell you exactly how long it is, but it's designed to inspire, equip and sustain women to become and remain successful local representatives for their communities. And as well as the training aspect, there's a mentoring aspect which follows on afterwards. So it sounds like a really wonderful opportunity. If people are interested, I'm going to put the link in my councillor report, but it's also on our council Facebook page as well. I went to a wonderful event in the Bairnsdale Library on the 8th of March, where the in-person and online attendees were treated to hearing the diverse and inspiring stories of 4 remarkable local women. Glenys Watts, who's the chair of Gunai Kurnai Traditional Owner Land Management Board, Kylie Finley, who is a CFA member, and Josephine Jacoby, and also, pardon me, Dr. Linda Wilkinson, whose current career only, because she's had a number, is a dog trainer. I think everyone listening enjoyed these stories enormously and would have found them relatable and in very many ways instructive as well. So I thank those council officers who organised this. I believe it was Rebecca and Beck primarily. And then I was delighted to attend a VLGA luncheon at the Windsor Hotel in Melbourne to commemorate International Women's Day as well. That was on Friday the 10th of March. The guest speaker was Dr. Andrea Carson, who's Professor of Political Communication in the Department of Politics, Media and Philosophy at La Trobe University. And she presented to the 30 or so attendees some of her research findings, looking at gender issues in politics and particularly in local government. Just a very few of her findings were that women councillors tend to be older. In fact, over 51 is the average age. They're 3 times more likely to be carers of children or elderly relatives, and far less likely to serve multiple terms due to the role strain that creates. There is a significant missing cohort of women councillors who are less than 45 years of age. Gender-based incivility was also discussed, which is a factor in deterring and retaining women elected members on council. So the big challenge is to get more women to stand for election. Apparently they're more successful at getting elected once they decide to stand, but also to support them once they're elected to stay in the roles. And it's an important issue because women are 50% of our communities, and there are net benefits when there is equal representation, including less corruption, apparently, according to a KPMG research. I participated in a Farmers for Climate Change online event on the 5th of March for the launch of a report called Farming Forever by the Federal Minister for Agriculture, Fishing, Forestry and Emergency Management, Murray Watt. And there were also some very interesting presentations in that event as well, including from Charlie Prell, who's the chair of Farmers for Climate Action, who highlighted the fact that we don't have a national strategy for climate action in agriculture. And that's a huge gap, because of the 600 or so odd farmers that they surveyed, 93% of them indicated a real interest in undertaking the critical work of reducing on-farm emissions, but they felt there was a leadership in education, there was a gap in leadership and education in that space. So lots of work to do there. I'll put the link to that report also in my councillor report. We all know that there are many remarkable people in our various communities in East Gippsland, people who, through our personal networks and through our work as councillors, we are really privileged to get to meet and to know. Their work and contributions often go unsung and unacknowledged. I would like to pay tribute to one such member of the Raymond Island community who recently passed away, and that is Andrew Bold. Time won't allow me to tell Andrew's full story here, but there are some wonderful tributes on the Friends of Painesville and Raymond Island Facebook page, and I'd like to thank local historian and Councillor Officer Martin Richardson for recording and sharing a more extensive version of his story. Andrew had a long history of residing in Raymond Island, and his involvement with Painesville Maritime Museum and the history of Raymond Island were two of his many specialties. The maritime interpretive signage around Painesville foreshore and the ferry history on display at the Raymond Island ferry landing are part of his legacy. Photography, of course, was another well-honed skill for which Andrew was very well known. He was a friendly and generous contributor to his local community and will be sorely missed. I'd like to offer sincere condolences to Andrew's family and his many friends. Finally, I would just like to mention the latest IPCC report that was released just yesterday, called AR6 Synthesis Report. And once again, this report provides a sobering reminder that with global emissions yet to show any decrease, our current trajectory will see planetary heating more like 3.3 degrees rather than the 1.5 degrees of the Paris Climate Agreement. We need to urgently step up our actions, and Australia and East Gippsland are not exempt from this responsibility. And in that vein, I would just like to put it on record that I proposed a notice of motion be brought to this council as an item of urgent business to be considered in the meeting this evening, but sadly it wasn't accepted to be presented to the council. It was deemed not able to meet the criteria for being an item of urgent business. So I think we'll have to find other ways to increase our activity in this area. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Uri, and I hope we can find a way of prosecuting those views at some stage. Councillor Buckley, we're not in question time, so we're just going to move on to you for your report.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I do have a question, though, in regards to the length of reports. What's the limitation time-wise?
It's normally 5 minutes, but we are generous because councillors are often busy with what they're doing. So,
yes, okay, thank you. No report.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Councillor White.
I didn't wish to do a report, but I would, in hearing the sad news of Andrew's passing, I would just like to say something about the man, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
In terms of my days of doing the roadside slashing on Raymond Island, and it was done twice a year, which was in October and late December. And Andrew was very passionate about lots of things, including nature. And during October, the orchids would flower on the road verges on the island. And through persistence and a kind ear from Shire, The slashing during October was postponed so as his orchids could flower and he could enjoy them, and so could others walking along Gravelly Point Road, I believe it was. And just to say that, yes, his persistence, and he had a system in place whereby everybody was a winner. He could photograph his orchids and enjoy them, and then later in the year the actual fire prevention slashing could be done, and everybody was happy. Thank you.
Councillor White, thank you. And Councillor Uri, thanks for bringing that to our attention, and of course the Council extends their condolences to Andrew's family. Councillor Van Diegel.
Thanks, Mayor. I don't wish to provide an update, but I have sent in my update to Vanessa for inclusion.
Terrific. It'll be in the minutes. Great. Thank you. Councillor Crook.
I've got a few things to talk about.
Terrific.
I attended the International Women's Day keynote address with Alice Arkin and Philippa Tyndale from Maddox Lawyers as they acknowledged the International Women's Day theme, Cracking the Code, Innovation for a Gender Equal Future. Specifically, we heard from a South African woman from Sub-Saharan Africa about a foundation that's been established to support education in that area to enhance social mobility and reduce poverty. It was an eye-watering account of, first-hand account of this woman's experiences at the hands of what can only be described as social war, cultural war, ethnic war, but the remarkable recovery that her community has made through schooling, and the recovery of those young women and the bright future that they now aspire to. So it was inspirational, and in that international context, it was quite amazing. I've recently been working my way through Council's health and wellbeing plan. As most people would know, Council's leading the development of our new 4-year municipal health and wellbeing plan titled Well Placed for Wellbeing, 21 to 25. The aim, of course, is to improve the health and wellbeing of all these Gippsland communities. Health and wellbeing clearly needs to be at the heart of what Council does, and the idea is that this work will be integrated into the Council plan in the future. I'd just like to remind everybody that consultation on the health and wellbeing plan is currently open for public input and comment, and that I urge everybody to make a contribution via the Council's website, and I think consultation closes on the 28th of this month, so a couple of weeks' time. I started to read also the final instalment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's 6th assessment report, which is an 8-year-long undertaking from the world's most authoritative scientific body on climate change, which was released on Monday. At 8,000 pages, I don't know if I'll actually get to read it in its entirety, but as already mentioned by Councillor Uri, the summary documents certainly make for sobering reading. And of course, emissions around the world are leading to the destruction of homes, the loss of livelihoods and the fragmentation of communities, something that we've also experienced here in East Gippsland. As well as the increasingly dangerous and irreversible risks, should we fail to change course and reduce, ideally to zero, our production and burning of fossil fuels. In that context, Australia is the world's largest coal exporter, accounting for 29% of traded coal globally only a few years ago, and will soon also be the largest natural gas exporter, if we're not already. Of course, this brings great revenue to our country, but that's because we don't count the costs incurred through climate-driven catastrophes. Currently, under our government's plan, we don't count the actual burning of fossil fuels that we dig up in our emissions profiles either. When we send the coal overseas and someone else burns it, that's just seen as not really our problem. So, to extend our influence and responsibility in a positive way, at a future council meeting, I'll be proposing that our council ask the federal government to include these emissions resulting from the burning of fossil fuels that we produce to be included in our domestic carbon emissions profile, so that we can truly and transparently and accountably account for the role that we play in destabilising the climate and work towards a future system which reduces emissions to the greatest extent possible for the well-being of our community and the planet. few other things to say there, but I think I'll just include them in my report. Thank you.
Councillor Crook, thank you. Councillor Stowe.
Well, I'm almost embarrassed to give my report after global warming and World Women's Day and the health report. Anyway, we've had the usual roads, rubbish and rates, but I was delighted to go along to the tennis club, Tom. The local tennis club been running a long weekend in March tournament for something like 50 years this year, and 170 participants. And over the years, they've had some great players come and win this event and compete in this event, including some Davis Cup players and some Wimbledon players. This year, Doug from the West Bansdale Primary School interviewed 3 of their life members, Ken Smith, John Fraser and John Glenn. Now, it's good to see those people interviewed publicly in front of the rest of their peers, and also acknowledged for the great work they've done for the tennis club over a long period of time. So well done to the tennis club, and may the tournament last for many more years.
Absolutely. Thanks for doing that.
If you don't mind, I just forgot to mention, I need to congratulate Councillor Stowe. Just yesterday...
You don't have a point of order. You are...
Yeah, point of order, please, Mr Mayor. Completely out of order.
If the council doesn't mind, I'd just like to acknowledge the work that was done by Trevor in the early days of this council in reinstituting our parking inspector and ensure the community that he is in fact doing his job. I received this parking ticket just yesterday.
And for the record, Councillor Crook has paid the infringement.
Couldn't have gone to a more worthy recipient.
Councillor Allen, Deputy Mayor.
That's a hard act to follow, Mr Mayor. I attended a couple of events around the 3rd and 4th of March, both with the Mayor on both occasions and with Councillor Van Diggle on the Saturday. The first one was the Big Boys Barbecue over at Cremon Hall, which raised over $70,000 for the day.
Wow.
Yeah, so congratulations to Bob Yates and his very, very hard-working committee, and thank you to the 6 ladies who provided all the catering. And I think the thing that really needs mentioning is that because Bob never turned up with the kitchen staff that he promised, he had to do the washing up, which I thought was justice. The next day, as I said, along with Kirsten and Mark, I attended an International Women's Day event organised by Julie Chester at the Lake Surf Club. It was inspiring. We had Ava and Tia Morrison, 2 young participants in the surf program, who spoke about what they do and why they do it and the benefits that they get out of it. And then Morgan Chester and Danielle Ryan spoke of their journey through the club, through life, and how their community service through the surf club opened doors to them as they went about their chosen careers. And I've got to say, I come away from there feeling very, very inspired by the stories that we heard. It was really a special day. I also attended the EGMI business breakfast up at the Christian College on May 13th. And the focus of that was to how to prepare the kids going through school from year 7 on for the workforce, what was needed. And it was a very, very good forum that explored what employers want, what educators see, and it was very well worth doing. As Jane mentioned in her report, the Grants Commission briefing I thought was really quite enlightening, and I think we ought to be very, very accommodating to the Grants Commission whenever they come down, because East Gippsland Shire does pretty well out of their deliberations. And in closing, I'd also like to acknowledge Andrew Bold and the contribution he's made through his life to the Pains on Raymond Island community, and he will be sorely missed. Thank you.
Thanks for your reports, councillors. I've got a couple of points that I'll bring out of my report, including the fact that we were invited to present to the Senate inquiry into bank closures in regional Australia. The CEO and General Manager Canizaro and I were able to represent the views of the community at that inquiry. The main points are in my report for those who'd like to tease that out. We've had meetings with our federal and state local members to maintain that mutual awareness of both our significant social issues and also our major capital works programs. And I think that's really important, that we maintain those open and reciprocal communication lines with our federal and state members. That's very important. As Councillor Allen mentioned, we attended the Big Blokes Barbecue, and $70,000, 300 people attended, and it was big and it was blokey, and it was a pretty impressive day. And it was a real contrast, as I think you alluded to, Councillor Allen, the recognition of an International Women's Day at the Lakes Entrance Surf Lifesaving Club. Both complementary and really recognising the work of men and women in our communities. Councillors, one of the most impressive fire brigades, and I've got a soft spot for fire brigades, is Mount Taylor Fire Brigade. And Mount Taylor Fire Brigade has over 100 members and a really vibrant group of people, and they celebrated their 80 years of service to the community, and I was able to attend their birthday celebration, and with much reluctance to Captain Jeff Crane, I actually led them in a rendition of Happy Birthday, but by the time we got to that, there'd been quite a lot of work at the bar, and so the members were able to sing mostly in tune Happy Birthday. But it's a real tribute to Jeff Crane and the leadership team. It's just amazing that they not just respond to emergencies, but that brigade is really one of those examples of the glue in our community that really holds communities together. Youth ambassadors have been mentioned. We visited Raymond Island, the Local Government Grants Commission. And lastly, I'd like to acknowledge the Victorian Inspector General for Emergency Management, Tony Pearce, who is walking from one end of the Shire to the other. And he's raising awareness of mental health and wellbeing for emergency service responders. So if you see Tony and the caravanserai wandering its way out to Malakuta and back, that's 1,440 kilometres that Tony is walking to raise awareness and money for the Emergency Services Foundation. So I really salute Tony and his work and acknowledge all those emergency service workers and responders, including those people at Mount Taylor Fire Brigade, and the work that the foundation does to support the wellbeing, health and wellbeing of emergency service responders. It was a really terrific morning, only yesterday morning, at our new Bairnsdale Fire Station, which is the pride of the fleet in the region. There's no doubt about it, councillors. Thanks, councillors, for your work and for your reports. I know that you're really busy in your own ways out in our community. Let's move on, councillors, to item 5, which are officers' reports, and CEO, you're going to introduce item 5.1.1, the Audit and Risk Committee Biannual Report.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The report in front of you this evening is the Audit and Risk Committee Biannual Report, July to December 2022. As required under the Local Government Act, the committee needs to report to Council twice per year, and that report is attached tonight for your information. Part of the Act requires the CEO to table at the next available Council meeting, which is this one tonight. The committee has reviewed a wide range of reports from internal auditors and management. They have a very important oversight role for Council, plus also, and I think I've said this before, there's a great deal of skill on that committee that provides input and suggestions and ideas around how we present our information, when issues arise, and so on. So the report is attached there for your information, for Councillor's consideration. And as you'll see in the report, it shows the items that have been reviewed by the ARC and the key highlights. So I recommend the report to you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you for that, Mr Basford, CEO. Councillors, are there any questions of the CEO? A comprehensive report, it would seem. Councillor Buckley, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just for the public at large, just asking the CEO if there's anything that should be brought to the public's attention about concern in regards to anything raised by the Audit and Risk Committee.
Through you, Mayor. Thank you for the question, Councillor Buckley. The report is quite comprehensive in regards to the items considered in the July to December period. I don't believe there is anything of concern there other than our normal suite of reports that we provide, which does include things around risk assessment, risk appetite, OH&S, and a whole range of things that that as council and officers we need to keep a very close eye on. So that is all listed in the report in the tables, and I believe that it's very comprehensive what the committee have actually looked at over that 6-monthly period. I'm certainly happy to take a specific question if there is something that's caught your eye, Councillor Buckley.
Look, thank you. That's fine, CEO. I can raise any issues that I see via email. Thank you.
Councillors, any further questions? In which case, councillors, there is a recommendation. Do I have a motion? Councillor Allen. Do I have a second to Councillor Uri? Councillor Allen, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I think that the Audit and Risk Committee deserves to be complimented on the job that they do, and also our councillors that sit on it, because sometimes it's like eating dust going through it. It's that dry, but it's a very essential part of governance of the organisation, and I commend this report.
Councillor Allen, thank you. Councillor Uri, would you like to speak to the motion as seconder?
Eating dust. No, I think just to reiterate the CEO's words, I think we're very fortunate to have the independent members that we do on this committee. I think the scrutiny of the reports presented to the committee is done in a very rigorous fashion, and there's certainly no holding back with asking of questions. So I'm really happy with the way, as a councillor on that committee, I'm really happy with the way it's functioning at the moment. Happy to commend the report.
Councillor Uri, thank you. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak to or against the motion? Thank you, councillors, in which case I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? CEO carried unanimously. Councillors, we'll move on to item 5.2 and Ms Weigel, Assets and Environment, your patch, and we have a petition.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. This report is a response to a petition that was presented to Council back on the 7th of February, so this is a detailed response. And we've already heard from the lead petitioner, Mr Lever, earlier this evening, and we thank him for his clarification of some of the points of his petition. Councillors, as the report outlines, the toilet, or the proposed toilet, is part of a range of improvements that are being undertaken working with the Raymond Island community, with Glowerk and the Raymond Island Landcare, to introduce a range of improvements to the Raymond Island, and particularly to accommodate those many visitors we're seeing come to the island to look at koalas. So we talk about the Koala Trail and improving the Koala Trail. They've included to date improvements to the ferry park, replacement of the existing toilet at the ferry park, and significant revegetation of areas of the island to enhance habitat by the Landcare Group, and the development of trails and trail markers to assist in the management and managing where visitors walk and minimise environmental damage. So there's been some great work with the community and a reference group made up predominantly of community members, and those are 2 other agencies. Part of that is identified that it is a long trail to walk sometimes, and there is a need for another toilet at some point midway in the walk to accommodate those many visitors we have. As the report outlines, the planning of this report, of this toilet and the exact location is still in concept design, and will be informed by a range of matters, primarily amongst them is the lay of the land and also the cultural heritage significance of the area. We obviously need to be avoiding areas of cultural heritage significance. So that, along with a range of other things, will start to influence where we can put a toilet. But we do understand and we're sensitive to the need to place the toilet so it's as far away from properties as we can manage it and make sure that it's sensitively screened when it's designed. So we take on board what the petitioners are saying, and we will certainly continue to involve them in discussions around the position of a toilet. So councillors, with me tonight I have Paul Oakes, who is our Coordinator of Project Planning and Design, who is here to answer any technical questions. And as the Mayor has indicated, I know a number of you have been to the site and looked at the site and understand it. Some of the challenges that we're facing about where we place the toilet itself. Thank you, Mayor.
Great. Thank you, Ms Weigel. Councillor Buckley, you've got a question, and then Councillor Crook.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Through you, I'm just wanting to have an answer pretty simply. Can it be put in the place that when it was discussed earlier that is happy to be put by the residents that have put the petition together? Is the location that they're happy with something that we can accommodate?
It's a good question, and I'm sure there's some issues and opportunities around what was proposed, Ms Weigel.
That's right. And look, I'm not sure if Mr Oakes heard the presentation by Mr Lever. So just for his benefit, they were talking about on the east side of the 12th Avenue. Really, at this stage, we're still looking through the findings of the Cultural Heritage Assessment before we can make a definitive comment on where it can or can't go. Certainly, we're looking at a range of locations, and we are very aware, and officers have been looking at a range of locations and are aware of the desire of those residents. So certainly, we're looking at whether we can place it there. There are a range of issues that we still need to work through because we're still at that point of concept design. So, Councillor Buckley, whilst I'd love to say yes or no definitively, until we get that further information, I really can't.
Councillor Buckley, thank you.
Thanks. Just a supplementary question. Does that mean that before all of this goes forward, it'll come back to council for a decision when all that's been clarified?
It's not our normal practice to bring final design back to council. We can certainly brief the councillors on where the final location is.
Thank you.
Great. Councillor Buckley. Councillor Crook.
I actually had a similar question to that of Councillor Buckley, but maybe I'll reframe it. We heard from the Speaker petitioner tonight that they believe there is an opportunity to put the toilet at a certain location, which may require the pumping of toilet effluent and trenching some distance to provide the pipe work. If that was to be investigated, would that... I guess my question is, are there significant cultural heritage issues at that area, and would trenching potentially significantly delay those cultural heritage assessments or further complicate the development of the site?
I might hand that question across to Mr Oakes to answer, if I may.
Thanks, Councillor Crook. Good evening, Mr Oakes. Welcome.
Yes, good evening. Welcome. Thank you. Thanks, Councillor, through you, Mayor. Yes, the cultural heritage is pretty well covers that entire area. So until we find out what the cultural heritage assessment is, that'll ultimately drive the outcome.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Crook. Councillor Uri.
Thank you, Mayor. Fiona or Mr Oakes, I'm wondering, Mr Lever also mentioned eco-loos, and I'm not sure, that probably a number of different environmental toilet facilities that don't require plumbing in. Is that a possible option for this situation?
I believe Mr Oakes and his team have looked at that, and whilst it has some appeal, it also has some challenges that perhaps Mr Oakes can briefly go through.
Yes, thanks, Councillor, through you, Mayor. Yes, we have also investigated the eco-loos. It's like a lot of things, everything comes at a cost. When the activity, as I explained on the day, the grant comes with very strict activities. As long as we follow those activities, and the activities actually make up what we can and can't do to acquit against the grant. So eco-loos are not one of the activities. However, working through the activities, we've got to make sure that we can stay within the guidelines of the grant, obviously with the budget, because we're not interested in blowing this budget. And we've also got to make sure that we can acquit the grant by June, because the milestones end in June.
Okay. Good question.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank
Councillor
you.
Uri. Any further questions, councillors? Good questions, thank you, and good clarification. Thanks, Ms Weigel. Councillors, there is then a recommendation. Do I have a motion? Councillor Greason. Do I have a second to councillors? Councillor Crook, Councillor Greason, did you want to speak to the motion? You have to navigate your way to it.
Thank you. Yes, no, I support the motion. I think it's very clear that it's still in concept design stage and needs a lot more work, hopefully quickly. But I mean, from our walk around there, I think it looks as though it should be quite achievable to build an aesthetically pleasing toilet in a place that's not readily visible to the residents in the area. Thank you.
Councillor Greason. Councillor Crook, seconder, would you like to speak to the motion? Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak to or against the motion? Thank you, councillors, in which case I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. Carried unanimously. Item 5.2.2, councillors, is a standing committee submission on the road network. Ms Weigel, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you, councillors. We know from time to time both the state and Australian government have inquiries into various items of interest to council. And most recently there has been an inquiry of the Australian Government's House of Representatives Standing Committee into the impact of severe weather on the road network, both local, regional and state road and national road network. Given the impact of road and weather on our road network and our experience with both floods, fires and droughts on what that does to our road network, we felt it was very important that we make a submission to the inquiry. The inquiry had a closing date of the 28th of February, which unfortunately we're not able to get this report to council in time for. So we have submitted an officer-level submission to the inquiry, which is attached for your information, and we're now seeking council's endorsement of that submission, and we can then advise the Standing Committee that this is in fact a council-endorsed submission. So seeking your approval and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Councillors, are there any questions? Thank you, councillors. Must be a comprehensive report, in which case there is a recommendation. Do I have a motion? Councillor Allen. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Buckley, thank you. Councillor Allen, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I think this is this submission gets down to fine detail on the effect of climate change, not on a broad scale, but on a very much localised scale, which has got the potential then to lead to improve construction and replacement of damaged assets. And I actually presented that paper to the Seats conference a couple of weeks ago, and they've taken up advocacy on that. So I think it's a very, very good document and one that I totally support.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing with seats. Councillor Buckley, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, look, I think that bringing it back to a practical application, our roads are dangerous. They've been neglected by the state. I think that it's well overdue that we point out the dangers to our community with travelling on these roads, and I would hope, regardless of your opinions on climate change or other, that we take a very practical and quick approach to being able to deal with what is a very important issue. So I fully support the motion.
Great. Councillor Buckley, and this report also refers to council roads, not just state roads.
Correct,
Councillors,
yes.
is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Crook. And then Councillor Uri. Councillor Crook, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to endorse what Councillor Allen has said, this is an excellent example of a practical application of our climate change adaptation strategies. Obviously, severe weather events are having a major impact on a range of council assets and infrastructure, and the road network, obviously in such an isolated area, is critical infrastructure. So this is important work that we have to get right, and I think this is a very good step in the right direction, so I commend the report.
Councillor Crook. Councillor Uri.
Thank you, Mayor. I also endorse those comments, and I'm very happy to hear that Councillor Allen has been able to table this report for progression in other areas. I thank the officers for the report. I think it is really excellent, and for taking the initiative to table it rather than to wait for council endorsement. I think there is a real sense of urgency here, and I think it was worthwhile doing that in order to get the submission in. One of the things that strikes me in this is the opportunities that it provides for research and development, for new design and construction of roads and infrastructure. You know, for our young people wondering what work they're going to do in the future, I think this is a great example of an area that's going to have great need in the future. So happy to endorse the motion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks to you for that. Councillors, would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? In which case, councillors, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. Carried unanimously, CEO. Let's move on to the next item, 5.2.3, which is a contract 1541 Lucknow Rec Reserve Gymnasium Access Road construction. We're still with you, Ms Weigel.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and councillors. Before you is a report which is the first of several contract reports before council this evening. Councillor, you'll all be aware, I'm sure, as you've driven past the Lucknow Recreation Reserve and started to see the gymnastics pavilion coming out of the ground, which is being anticipated with great excitement by our gymnastics community. It's very exciting to see it almost delivered. The final part of that project is providing an additional access road, which is being developed as a separate contract because the skills required to develop a road are quite different to the skills required to develop a pavilion. So the contract before you is supported by a confidential tender evaluation panel report, which outlines the details of the assessment of the submissions to the tender. And we're happy to take any questions you may have on this report, but there is a recommendation in the confidential attachment for an appointment of a contractor.
Yep.
With me this evening, I have Sayaram Jegathorswaran, who is our Manager of Capital Projects and Plant, who is available to answer any questions of a technical nature.
Mr Jegathorswaran, welcome. Good to see you here this evening. Thank you for that, Ms Weigel. Councillors, are there any questions? In which case, councillors, is there a motion to move this recommendation? Councillor Greason, thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Crook. Councillor Greason, you've asked to move the item. Can you just check that that's the item that we're moving? And in which case, I'm going to ask you to populate the blanks
So the item that we're considering tonight reads, number 1, that Council receives and notes this report and all attachments pertaining to this report. Number 2, that Council accepts the tender submitted by JW Volk Proprietary Limited for Con 2023-1541 Lucknow Recreation Reserve Gymnasium access road construction for the contract amount of $665,476.11 exclusive of GST. And number 3 and number 4 are as on the screen. Thank you.
Councillor Greason, thank you very much. Councillor Crook, you seconded that, did you not? Would you like to speak to the item? Sorry, Councillor Greason, just check that what's on the screen is correct and confirm that, please.
Yes, that is correct.
Councillor Greason, would you like to speak to that item? Sorry, Councillor Crook, I'm just getting the system right here.
Thank you, Mayor. I think Ms Weigel described the project and how exciting it is to see this developing the way it is, and it's an amazing building and it will be great to see it progress.
Great, thank you. Councillor Crook, you've seconded it. Would you like to speak to the item? Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak to or against, for or against the motion? Thank you, councillors. I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. That's carried unanimously. Thanks for your patience there, councillors. We're on to item 5.2.4. Thank you. Right, we've lost comms. Houston, there is a problem. We'll just stand by for a moment and we'll get our online councillors back online. 1, 2, 3, you're back again. Sorry, we lost visuals for a moment there. 5.2.4 of councillors, contract 2019-1284 maintenance and repair for mobile plant. Contract extension.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, with the extensive inventory of plant that we have as a council, it's necessary to maintain and repair it effectively. To do that, we do have an in-house mechanic who does a fantastic job, but we also rely on the services of an external contractor to be available, especially for the maintenance of our mobile plant. So we have had a contract in place since April 2019, which was for 3 years, but also allowed us to exercise 2 extension periods. So this report before you, it seeks Council's approval to extend that contract for that second time for a further 12-month period to the 5th of April 2024. I'm happy to put the report and the recommendation to you. Again, we have our Manager of Capital Projects and Plant, he's just back, Shire, with us, who's able to answer any technical questions. Happy to leave it there. Thank you.
Great,
Mayor.
thank you. Ms Weigel. Councillors, are there questions? Contract extension. Councillors, thank you. There is a recommendation. Do we have a motion, please? Councillor Stowe, Councillor Van Diggle. Councillor Stowe, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, thank you.
Councillor Van Diggle, thank you. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? In which case, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. That motion is carried unanimously. Item 5.2.5. Ms Weigel, this is your last item, so you've been busy, but this is electric vehicle fleet and advocacy for fuel efficiency standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, before you is, I think, a fairly self-explanatory report that outlines the advocacy work of the City's Power Partnership, which includes inviting local government elected officials around Australia to add their name to as signatories to a statement calling for fuel efficiency standards to be introduced nationally. Those standards are outlined in the report and are also attached as an attachment to this report. So councillors, the recommendation before you is that council becomes a signatory to the joint statement as detailed in the attachment. With me tonight for his first council report with us is our new Manager of Sustainability and Waste, Nathan Mazurka, who is available to take any questions of a technical nature. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr Mazurka. Welcome. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Crook.
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon, Nathan. I just wonder if you could explain to us if there's any current system of emissions regulations for vehicles and how what's being proposed is different.
Thank you for the question, Councillor, and through the Mayor, I'm happy to provide a response. Obviously, the team, particularly through the work of Rebecca Lamble, has been right on this issue for Council and is working to progress our own infrastructure to support EVs. Just talking with Rebecca today, actually, she really just compared Australia's current emission standards as almost being absent compared to other jurisdictions, particularly talking when we talk about Europe and places like that. So we have found that we've got a bit of work to catch up. Obviously, you know, transport is one of Australia's fastest growing source of emissions, second to our energy sector, so it represents a big piece of our emissions profile. The fuel efficiency standards typically measured in grams per kilometre, which probably isn't news, and that's the standard that's been set globally. The standards being pursued by the Cities Power Partnership refer more to outcomes to be achieved and some of the challenges that they should address, rather than referring to any specific details within them. Maybe just adding a little bit further to that, if you're happy for me to, the Australian Government released for consultation the first National Electric Vehicle Strategy late last year, and the Climate Council of Australia provided a submission to that. What they're calling for lines up very closely to what the Cities Power Partnership statement refers to in the paper in front of Council this evening. I guess the short version is we've got a long way to go, and we should be aiming for at least a comparable set of fuel standards to what you find in other jurisdictions. Thank you.
Great, thank you for the comprehensive response. Councillor Crook again.
And if you wouldn't mind, if these fuel standards were to be introduced, that could mean that we would see more efficient cars as well as electric car adoption by government agencies, which would provide for a second-hand electric vehicle market. So I guess that question's twofold. Would it actually provide for more efficient cars and therein lower the cost of driving for everyday Australians, and would it provide for a second-hand EV market?
Thank you again for the follow-up question. Look, through the Mayor, I'll just respond to the first point. Certainly, it would allow and lower, community transport costs, both with more efficient vehicles through hybrids or more efficient use of conventional fuel sources. We also expect it would drive down the cost of electric vehicles in the market, making them more accessible. I think the second question around the second-hand market, I think it's such early days. It's hard to say, but you would expect that would be the result as people upgrade. I think, people buying electric vehicles at the moment are probably quite pleased with them, but in 2 or 3 years they might be looking at a newer model, and then we might see that second-hand market opening up also, and going to your point, making them more accessible as a result. Thank you.
Councillor Crook, thank you. Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, look, I just wanted to address the comment made about efficiency. My concerns in regards to the, moving forward in this space is reliability and also safety, because we hear of electric cars not being exactly reliable, and also their batteries are, can be susceptible to fires, etc. So, we're investing a lot of money in this space and a lot of time and policy making, and I'm just a little bit concerned that those areas haven't been addressed.
So are they safe and
reliable?
Are they reliable?
Thank you for the question, and obviously through the Mayor, I'll attempt to provide a response. I think the points you raised, Councillor Buckley, are accurate, certainly in an Australian context. However, overseas, we've seen these issues sort of work through and resolved. We are in a bit of a catch-up. So I guess for me, I think council should take some confidence. It's not a new space when you look to other jurisdictions, but it is a space that we don't have reliable infrastructure spread across regional Victoria, for example, and we haven't yet seen the long haul heavier vehicle types come into the market at a cost, or even reliability in terms of distance for large SUVs and other things that you'd expect taken up by our farming community, for example. I think we're a way off there still. Is just to go to your point. Safety is certainly an issue, has been in the media recently, and I have heard, even looking at embedding some fire mitigation technology into vehicles themselves. So I think it's a changing space, but we can learn a lot from other parts of the world that are well ahead on us at present. Thank you.
Thank you. Good questions. Councillor Van Diehl.
Thanks, Nathan. I'm not sure if it's really clear in here. It might be, but it's not clear to me. Is this a call out for fuel efficiency standards for organisations or Australians more broadly? Are we talking about fleet vehicles, or you're talking about transport for communities as well as our organisation? So, yeah. So then I guess my follow-up question is, because in it says support 100% of new vehicles sold in Australia to become zero emissions, blah, blah, blah. What is the timeline on those things? Because like you've just said, there's no infrastructure in places like the high country to really allow for this. So if we become a signatory on this, what do we actually lock ourselves into? Or, what do we...
I'm happy to take
Councillor Van Diehl, thanks for the question.
Mayor. So I think this is an advocacy piece. It doesn't set a standard as such. It is advocating for improved standards. So it doesn't lock council into anything. It's talking about Australia-wide. So we're talking about improvements generally to the efficiency, to the and as Nathan has mentioned, catching up with the standards that are already through much of the rest of Europe and Northern America and the like. So it's not just one type of vehicle, it's talking about vehicles generally, and it is an advocacy piece. So it doesn't call for a set standard, it calls on the government, on the Australian government, to improve the standards and set a, sorry, I've just lost my page, but to actually set fuel efficiency standards. So it's calling on the government to do more work in this space, really. So there are a number of local governments and a lot of councillors individually who have already signed up to this thing. And as an advocacy piece that complements some of the advocacy work, they're also doing at a local level, and some of the work they're also doing to implement their own local environmental strategies.
Can I ask one more follow-up question quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. Then Councillor Greason, go ahead.
It does say in there support 100% of new vehicles. So to me, it doesn't feel like it's necessarily advocating for improved. It's basically saying 100% this is what we want it to look like. So, I respect that works in cities, and I respect that it works in some areas, but I can't imagine it working here. So at least not yet, not for a long time. So this is not saying building infrastructure. It's talking about the vehicles specifically. So God, what implications does it have? Since it does say 100% of new vehicles. It doesn't say in areas that have the adequate infrastructure.
That's right, but it is, as Mr Mazurka has already mentioned, it is also talking about efficiency standards and reducing emissions of traditional, so it's not just about electric vehicles, it's about all vehicle types. So it's about emissions across the board. So that doesn't mean we wouldn't still see diesel, petrol, etc. vehicles, hydrogen when it comes, but it's talking about the efficiency and the reduction in emissions across the board. So it's not just about electric vehicles.
Thank you.
Councillor Greason.
Thank you, Mayor. I think my questions have been answered, but I just would like confirmation, either Fiona or Nathan, that joining up with this advocacy position does not lock us into anything except committing to the principle, and does not disadvantage anybody in the community.
Good question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greason. I think Mr Mazurka went through this to some extent, but I can happily confirm this doesn't lock us into anything. This is advocacy. This is lending our name to the advocacy effort of the CPP, which is the Cities for Power. I'm losing my way here, but it is purely an advocacy effort. It won't disadvantage anyone, and as Mr Mazurka has outlined, it will lead to longer term benefits for all of our community in the longer term.
Councillor Stowe.
I've got the same concerns as Councillor Kirsten, actually, and just to add to them, there's the issue of power for these vehicles. We're having trouble providing baseload power for our industries at the moment. We're closing down industries at peak times because we haven't got enough power for them. And if we suddenly put all these vehicles on the road, I'm not sure that we can power them. It'll make a further demands on our power system.
So that wasn't a question. We'll take that as a comment. Okay. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Mayor. The concern I've got is disadvantage to the less affluent people, because I don't know whether it was Tom or Nathan suggested that...
This is a question. We're asking questions. We're not in debate at the moment. Just want to point that out to councillors.
So the question is this: how do you not disadvantage the less well-off if you're talking about something that's going to increase the number of second-hand vehicles, when we all know that battery replacement in electric vehicles is the major cost? So how do we not disadvantage people by selling them off vehicles that have got a battery life of 12 months or whatever, and they're going to be bought by people who can't afford to buy new ones?
Okay.
So what's the safeguards on that?
Mr Mazurka, have you put your mind to that question?
Thank you for the question, and I'll attempt to provide a response. I think there's probably two parts to it through the Mayor, of course. So in terms of the replacement of batteries and the life of those, and, you know, would a second-hand vehicle have 12 months left in it? I think it's difficult to put an accurate answer. So I think I might just park that to the side and note the point. In terms of disadvantage to the community, I think I might just talk a little bit more broadly here just for one moment. What we've seen in Australia is the absence of fuel efficiency standards has meant manufacturers of cars across the world are able to sell lower, less efficient vehicles into the Australian market. Mm-hmm. Their priority, therefore, to supply new EVs has been in other jurisdictions, and that has been a limitation in seeing them brought into the country. That's the advice I've received today. So I think access and the cost of electric vehicles in some ways has been increased due to the lack of having firm regulations for them to increase supply and allow demand. And there's a whole range of things that the national government is looking at through its fuel efficiency strategy. So I don't think I've used the right term there. I did earlier, but yeah, I hope that provides some response. It's the absence of regulation which means we are in a bit of a catch-up, and it means that lower efficient vehicles that use more fuel, so they're probably more expensive to run on conventional fuels, aren't finding their way into the Australian market, if that's fair. Thank you.
If I could perhaps just add to that, thank you, Ms Mazurka, that if we go back to the report talks about this and the advocacy, it doesn't talk about just electric vehicles. And I might just read out the standards that they're advocating for must be mandatory and deliver at least equivalent settings to those in other major markets to ensure Australia does not stay at the back of the queue for cleaner vehicles. So that's vehicles generally. To give Australian drivers more choice and affordability than they have today by bringing a wider range of vehicle types to our shores. To support 100% of new vehicles sold in Australia to become zero emissions as soon as possible. So that means there isn't a set date to that. They're talking about as soon as possible to send a strong market signal that Australian communities, businesses and government agencies are ready for zero emission vehicles, and to be viewed and for any standard to be reviewed and updated regularly. So we would see that as the market changes, there would be the reviews and standard. So from this, councillors really hear what you're concerned about, people being disadvantaged by this. I think what the standard is, and what this advocacy piece is trying to do, is to make sure that all vehicles are of an acceptable standard, and that we're not seeing the vehicles that are no longer accepted in other parts of the world where they do have standards brought to Australia. Thank you.
Yep. So thanks for that clarification. That would have been my question, that other jurisdictions, Mr Msurka, Ms Weigel, do have efficiency standards, and the market meets those standards in other countries, and we get the cars at the back of the queue. Right.
Yes, that's our understanding,
Right.
yes.
Councillors, are there any further questions? In which case, there is a recommendation there, councillors. Do I have a motion? Councillor Crook, do we have a seconder? Councillor Greason. Councillor Crook, would you like to speak to the motion?
Sure. I've heard it said that Australia has become the dumping ground of the crappy technology cars. The inefficient cars that cost way, way more to run than the good cars that the good people of Europe or America currently enjoy. This paper is not, or this commitment is not proposing to impose this on anybody. This is of benefit to our communities, because it will create a regulatory environment for cars that get imported into the country to be more efficient. They'll use less fuel to drive further, which will benefit communities. It will be cheaper to drive around. And so as a community who drives around a lot, I think that's a really good thing. It's not trying to force anybody to drive an electric car. They're not going to make you get a car and try and drive it up to Mount Hotham and back without being able to charge it. Clearly, we will adopt that technology when the infrastructure is here to support it, and not before. I think this is a really positive move for our council, and I will certainly be signing up as an individual tonight, but I implore us to do it as a group, because I think that carries more weight, and I think it's in the interests of our community. Thank you.
Councillor Crook. Councillor Greason.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Allen and I were comparing cars today, and Councillor Allen has a diesel vehicle, a Tucson, and I have a hybrid RAV4. And I think Councillor Allen's fuel usage is equivalent to mine. And I think what I would like to see with this kind of establishment of fuel efficiency standards is that the vehicles that are efficient, like Councillor Allen's Tucson, are cheaper, more available across the board for the community. And I mean, they'd be much cheaper to run, obviously. So I think that the better standards would enable distinct advantages to the whole community.
Councillor Greason, thank you. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion?
Speak against it.
Councillors, I might just make one comment, and similarly, I have a hybrid car, and that Toyota RAV is available as a plug-in hybrid in America, and we don't get that model. They get the good ones. We get the back-end versions. And that's what this sort of commitment actually will encourage the likes of those big manufacturers to do, to actually encourage them to privilege the better quality, more efficient cars, rather than giving us the tail-end Charlies of the RAVs of this world. So on that basis, I support this for that reason. Councillors, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? One, two, three, four, five. Those against? Sorry, I'll just put that to the vote again, please. All those in favour? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those against? The motion is carried 6-3. Thank you, councillors. Thanks for the debate. Item 5.3, councillors. Thank you, Ms Weigel, for your work. Mr Cannizzaro, we're in your patch. Australian Local Government Association National General Assembly 2023 Notices of Motion. Thank you, Mr Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you, Mayor. Councillors, before you is a report regarding the 2023 National General Assembly of the Australian Local Government Association. Councillors, the key points for you to consider tonight are that the National General Assembly will be meeting between the 13th and the 16th of June this year in Canberra. The theme for this year, councillors, is Our Communities, Our Future, which conveys the critical importance of our communities, how they are the focus of our attention, how they are at the centre of all of our work. The 2023 motions are to focus on key priorities, including productivity, local government infrastructure, community wellbeing, data, digital technology and cybersecurity, climate change and renewable energy, and natural disasters and housing. Councillors, before you, there are 5 motions for consideration. They are found on pages 71 through to 77 in your agenda, councillors. The 5 motions, I'll summarise those, councillors. Motion 1 is around supporting the urgent need to upgrade critical infrastructure to respond to the impacts of climate change. Motion 2 is to review the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act of 1999 so that it is more effectively applied without unintended consequences. Motion 3 is to adequately resource the implementation of the recommendations in the State of the Environment report. Motion 4, councillors, is to restore funding for local government financial assistance grants to a level equal to at least 1% of Commonwealth taxation revenue. And motion 5 is about supporting communities affected by the rapid and excessive rise in insurance premiums. Councillors, if approved, these motions will proceed to submission, after which point in time, if they are all accepted, will be included in the ALDA agenda for the National General Assembly in June. Thank you, councillors. I present
Mr Cannizzaro, thank you for that report. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Crook.
I know they're probably all considered on their merit, but in past years, what sort of percentage of motions do we generally get passed at these events? Do we normally get most of our motions up, or are most of them voted down, or what's the experience?
Firstly, they need to get through the ALGA process, first and foremost. So in some cases, Councillor Crook, and thank you for your question through you, Mayor, in some cases there are repetitive motions, so they might bundle them up. So we may not see that ours is ticked off, so to speak, but it's co-joined to other motions. Hard to give you a percentage in terms of strike rates. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good question. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you. I'm just interested. Motion 1 states about investment in detailed modelling. So, you know, to help set new designs and standards for infrastructure based on impacts of climate change. Modelling sort of I don't understand how they get these results from modelling. Can you, is this based on empirical data, or is it just based on a guess?
Thank you, Councillor Buckley, and through you, Mayor, I might attempt at an answer and then hand over to Ms Weigel. No, I wouldn't call it a guess, Councillor Buckley. Modelling, there's an art to it, and there are smarter people than I that can do better modelling than I, but certainly modelling is an art that takes in a lot of data and information to provide or present a data set that decisions can be made on. I'm not sure if Ms Weigel wants to add any more to that.
Thank you, Mr Cannizzaro. I think that sums it up nicely. The modelling is using empirical evidence from the data that's been collected over the last decade or so, and is using that to extract forward. The modelling we use provides high, medium and low forecasts. When we look at where we're tracking against the forecasting, they took the forecasting back and applied it to, at least a decade ago, and look at what trajectory we're on based on that modelling against the characteristics at the time, and then compared that with what's actually happened. And that shows that we're somewhere between the medium to high area of the modelling. So there is a lot of scientific evidence that sits behind this, and it applies to history as well to make sure that the modelling is accurate. Thank you.
Councillor Buckley, thank you. Councillors, any further questions? Thank you, councillors. Let me just navigate my way back here. So there is a recommendation. Do we have a motion, councillors? Councillor Van Diggle, seconded by Councillor Crook. Councillor Van Diggle, would you like to speak to the motion?
I don't wish to say much except for that in the briefing when we spoke about narrowing them down, we couldn't really narrow them down. We thought they were all worthy of putting up, so I think it's fair. Our councillors have put in a lot of work to get these 5 motions up, so let's hope they go to ALGA this year.
Councillor Van Diggle, thank you. Councillor Crook?
Only to add that I think there's merit in all 5 motions, and I too hope that they succeed.
Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Thank you, councillors, in which case I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Councillors, we are on to item 5.4.1. The review of adoption of the development plan policy. Mr McConnell, we have got to your area at long last.
Thank you, Mayor. And through you, councillors, before you is a report regarding the review and adoption of a new or revised development plan policy. The policy was first adopted in 2017, and the review proposes what's really only minor changes to reflect an updated template that we're using for policies, but also, and in particular, to provide clarity in relation to community consultation. And obviously the officer's recommendation is the council adopts the revised policy and in doing so also rescinds the existing policy. Some of the key points for you: development plans provide a framework for approval of significant urban development projects and they are set up in accordance with the planning scheme. Development plan overlays are used in the planning scheme to identify where land needs a coordinated approach to its development and subdivision and the provision of infrastructure. And the adoption of a development plan following community consultation enables the subsequent approval of a subdivision without further public notice. And so that community consultation is important. But in doing so, it also then provides a degree of certainty for land development in accordance with that adopted development plan. So it's therefore important that the policy reflects Council's commitment to consultation prior to the formal adoption of a development plan, and more detailed procedures relating to the consultation and other operational matters are included in the development plan procedure, which is there for councillors noting rather than approval. The policy to some extent mirrors some elements that are in the planning scheme, but in doing so provides clarity and transparency about council's approach, particularly when in discussion with developers of major proposals. Also this evening online is Martin Richardson to assist with any detailed questions you may have. And so the report is presented for your consideration. Thank you, Mayor.
Mr McConnell, thank you. Councillors, are there any questions on the development plan policy? Councillor White.
Thank you. Martin, just as an example, would this have changed the way the Green Street proposal was presented to the public, where we have certainly got a lot of objectors there. Would this have made it easier to inform them if this proposal goes through?
Thank you, Councillor White, and through you, Mayor. No, it wouldn't. The development plan policy applies to really large developments. We're talking, 1,000 lots in Lakes Entrance, 1,300 lots in Paynesville, the 200 lots odd in Marlow that Council dealt with last week, Shannon Waters, Brookfield Lakes, really, really big developments. So the development policy is about coordinating really big developments that might require massive infrastructure investment and coordination of infrastructure. The Green Street proposal is a 10 or 11 lot subdivision, I think, and we have our processes for dealing with that, and that will be reported to Council in due course. So Councillor White, this policy doesn't really affect those, might I suggest, smaller developments, but equally important that we do have the processes in place to report to Council on those developments as well.
Okay, thank you. So would you consider that very low area in Lucknow would benefit from this? Like that's it's very low and subject to flooding and probably requires fill for it to be developed, but it's sort of still part of the town boundary, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mayor. The Lucknow area is subject to future growth. There is significant opportunities for growth there. Council has previously approved the future rezoning of land there, and it is most likely that this policy will apply to that area to ensure that multiple landowners can be coordinated and infrastructure can be provided to deal particularly with drainage. And that's actually the purpose of this policy, is to ensure that we can coordinate development in those important areas such as Lucknow, as you have raised, Councillor White.
Good, thank you, because that one just came to mind, because although it's a large area, it's owned by multiple people. So you would be right, you'd need to get some collective views and bring them all together to be on the same page.
Councillor White, thank you. Councillors, any further questions? Mr McConnell or Mr Richardson, my question about development plans is that they provide certainty for a developer, and that's important with large developments, but is there a time limit that's applied to a development plan such that a developer needs to implement it before things change over time? So attitudes, overlays, other statutory regulations, so that they could be sitting on a development plan. We might have seen that in Marlow for a long time, and does this report actually address that?
I might get Mr Richardson to respond, but I would comment that by their nature, the development plans will tend to be long-term plans, because they manage the coordinated development and release of land.
And often staged planning as well, yes?
Yes, over an extended period of time. But Mr Richardson, if there's some further comments you'd like to provide?
Thanks, Stuart, and through you, Mayor, and to you, Mayor, a very good question. I recall approving a development plan for Shannon Waters in Bairnsdale in about 2011, and we're only up to about stage 3. So they do last for a long time.
Right.
However, the benefit of this policy is that when a development plan is adopted, it means that there is not only certainty for developers, but certainty for the community as well. They know what they're going to get. If a developer comes back after the passing of time and says, I think I want to change something, then this policy says, well, in that case, you'll need a new development plan.
Right.
And I think you might be making reference to Marlow. We spent 5 years getting that one through. If someone comes back to us this year or next year and says, oh, we want to change the plan for Marlow, we'll say, okay, we'll put you right back through the community consultation process, because it's really important that the community, as well as the developer, knows what they're going to get.
Yeah, thanks. That's really important, and I appreciate the response. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Martin. I just I'm just wondering in regards to the removal of public notice provisions for subsequent planning permit applications. Can you just explain that to me? Because we're wanting to have better, community consultation. However, that seems to be flying in the face of that.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Buckley, and through you, Mayor, again, a really good question. So I'll try to simplify it. The provisions in the Victorian planning provisions around development plan overlays say that if the council adopts a development plan, then a subsequent subdivision application doesn't need to go to public notice. And I guess the reasons for that are, we go through, as the current councillors will know, we go through the process such as in Marlow, a really detailed process, and we finalise a plan for that particular parcel of land. Then it becomes quite complex if, when a subdivision application comes in, we get more objections. So the idea is that when you adopt a development plan, you've dealt with the community concerns about infrastructure and roads and drainage and open space. And so it means then when the council has adopted that development plan, when a subdivision application comes in, we don't have to go through the whole process again of concerns about lot sizes and roads and things. So the policy says when council adopts a development plan, we clearly understand the implications, we've taken on board the community concerns, and we've adopted a plan which sets out a concept for that land, so that then we don't have to repeat the whole process again when the subdivision application comes through. They are state policy provisions, and thus it is important that when the development plan is adopted, the community's concerns are all considered and taken on board, and the development plan reflects, the finally adopted development plan reflects those concerns, and then we can all pretty much be confident that the subdivision application that's lodged will be consistent with that development plan.
Thanks very much,
Great.
Richard. Martin, sorry.
Good question. Thanks, councillors. Any further questions, councillors? So, councillors, there is a recommendation there. Is there a motion, please? Councillor Greason, thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Buckley. Councillor Greason, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you. This is an important policy and should facilitate future larger developments. I think the public consultation issue is something I was interested in too when we discussed it a week or so ago. And I think it's very clear in the policy the extent of public consultation that will occur, and also the policy makes it clear that the public will have access to operational versions of any approved plans, and that development plans, it makes the comment development plans may be amended and modified from time to time, and it's important that a full copy of the current endorsed plan is available for inspection upon request. So I think it's dealt with most appropriately. Thank you.
Councillor Greason. Councillor Buckley.
Yes, look, I support Councillor Gresham's statement, and we all want to try and mitigate public unrest when we're going forward with development. We must ensure that we're having best management practices put in place, and that people are comfortable and that they feel like they have a voice. So I hope that the mild amendments to this policy will be able to facilitate that.
Councillor Buckley, thank you. Councillors of the motion, opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Thank you, councillors. I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. Carried unanimously. I believe there isn't any urgent or other business. Item 6, councillors, CEO. And we are moving into confidential business, and I'll need a motion to close the meeting to the public according to the provisions of section 66(2 of the Local Government Act. Councillor Allen, you're moving it. Yes. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Stowe, would you like to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Stowe, is the motion opposed, councillors? Would anybody else like to speak for or against this motion to close the meeting? In which case I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. Carried unanimously. Councillor. meeting, pen's up there, and we're back into an open meeting. Councillors, that concludes our meeting of the 21st of March 2023, which, as I mentioned at the start, is World Harmony Day and also the equinox. Thank you, councillors, for your deliberation and your work today. Thank you, officers, for your comprehensive reports and for being here. And councillors who are online, thanks for joining us. And for the rest of you, travel home